Hi Year 12s, the purpose of today's video is to focus on argument analysis. We're going to be using our prior knowledge of persuasive language and our insight from previous exams to predict the fundamental aspects of what a persuasive text might do. So I would suggest that for this video, you will need your argument analysis handbook with you. And you might also want to get out any of the Section C exam copies that you have. So essentially, I'm going to provide you with the context of a persuasive piece, the text type, and the author, and we're going to look at them and we're going to make predictions about what the contention could possibly be, what type of language the author would use, who the audience is likely to be. And by doing this, we are practicing associating certain persuasive texts and their authors and their contexts with the most likely approach that they would use. So let's look at our first. The context for number one is that it has been announced that a historic building in Port Namby is going to be demolished due to concerns about its safety and lack of usage. The text is a speech at a council meeting, and the orator, which we're using here rather than author because this is a speech, not a written piece, is the president of the local historical society. So this information is the kind of information we might get given in the background information prior to reading a persuasive text. So I would encourage you now to pause the video and write down some suggestions of what the contention might be, who the audience might be, and what kind of language might be used given this information. So, when I look at this, I immediately think that because the orator of the speech is the president of the local historical society and that the building that's going to be demolished is a historical building, my initial thinking is that the contention is going to be against the destruction of the building, and that it is very likely that the president of the local historical society is going to be advocating for the building to be repaired, perhaps, or better appreciated or repurposed. It makes sense to me that the contention would be about supporting this building remaining rather than supporting the building having to be demolished. If the orator was a spokesperson for a new company that wanted to open up in the area, I might be more likely to think that they're going to support the demolition of this building to make way for a new building. But because it's someone in a historical society, I think it's more likely that they're going to be supporting that the building is going to be repaired and used, or that the building has really significant value to the town that needs to be acknowledged. It's a speech at a council meeting. So I'm already thinking that the audience is going to have council members on it. These are educated people who understand building laws and codes and things like that, as well as residents to the community who will be attending. And those residents, just like the members of the council, are probably likely to be coming into the meeting with differing views. Some probably think, okay, it's time we get rid of this building to make the community safer, and some are probably thinking, well, this building's really an integral part of the historical significance of this town. So if they were going for the contention that we need to repair this building, maintain this building, and repurpose this building, I would expect that some of the language being used would be an emphasis on the historic significance of the town, the history of the town, appreciating the people who have come before, the current residents, and all the work they've done in building up the town. So I would suggest that there is going to be a big appeal to the importance and significance of history and respecting that in a modern world. I would also think that perhaps they might attack modernity, and they might talk about how buildings these days are all the same, that perhaps they aren't built as well as older buildings were, that they are an eyesore perhaps, or that they don't bring anything special. So we're probably going to see some historical appeals. We might see some attacks on modernity. Maybe even there might be some environmental appeals, that for the sake of the environment, it is better to repair and restore what's there rather than demolish and start all over again. So hopefully you were thinking some of the same things, and from this I want you to take away that it's so important to just pause for a moment after you read the background information and give yourself time to make some predictions about what is likely going to be at the heart of this persuasive text. Let's have a look at another. So the context is that recently a local high school in Port Namby has seen increasing levels of graffiti and damage to school property in classrooms and in the yard. The text is a school newsletter, and the author is a Year 12 student who attends the school. So, because it's a Year 12, now I would suggest that you pause the video, you make some predictions, you jot down some notes about what the likely contention is, who the likely audience is, and given the author, what approaches they are most likely to take. So for me, I look at that it's a Year 12 student and that they attend this school. So a Year 12 probably is going to have a strong sense of maturity and maybe a sense of school pride. Perhaps their contention would be that, and because they're using the school newsletter, they're directing their message at the school community, parents, teachers, but importantly students. Perhaps their contention might be that students need to take more pride in the school, that students need to be keeping an eye out for this kind of behaviour, and that they need to be challenging that behaviour so that the school can look as good as possible and reflect the true nature of the students that attend it. I would expect to see inclusive language because the student is a member of the community that they are appealing to. Because this student has 6 years perhaps at this school, I would expect to see some anecdotal evidence of their own time at the school where they draw on their own experiences. I would expect to see them attempting to galvanise students to make a change and therefore probably be using inclusive language. I'm a student, you're a student, let's do this together. And I would probably expect the whole piece to be held together with a kind of appeal to a sense of pride in place and how that reflects upon the students in the wider community. So that's what I might expect to see from something like this. Let's have a look at one more. So for this one, the context is a local community group has recently opened a community garden in Port Namby. The text is a review in the Port Namby local newspaper, and the author is a local journalist. So now's the time to pause the video and make some predictions around potential contentions, audience groups, and type of language this author might use. So when I look at this and I look at the context that there's a community garden that's been recently established, I'm thinking that they, as a starting point, are probably likely either in support of the garden or they are critiquing an aspect of the garden that is flawed. So perhaps if they are in support of the garden, their contention might be that this kind of environmentally sustainable practices are so important in the community and that this is something that should be extended and embraced by the community. Or perhaps they're taking a critical look at the initiative and they're suggesting that it's a flawed initiative because it's too exclusive. The community garden plots are too expensive and that means it's become classist and only certain members of the community have access to it, and that buying a plot needs to be more reasonable so it can be a more inclusive initiative for all members of the society, not just the more affluent residents. It's a review, so I would expect the language to be evaluative. I would expect them to analyse the pros and analyse the cons, and in that way present as someone who has really thought quite deeply about it and whose opinion has come from fact and proper examination. If they're a journalist, there's a level of integrity that needs to be there, and perhaps they're going to have a more holistic view than if it was just someone who was in charge of the initiative, or whether it was just a local resident who is displaying their opinion only based on their experience. I would expect that if they are either condemning it or condoning it, there's probably a call to action for someone in the community. If they're suggesting that the initiative is fantastic and needs to be expanded, that they're probably calling on more local residents to get involved. If they're suggesting that it's classist and elitist and limiting, then they're probably calling on the organisers of the community garden to make it a bit more inclusive, to lower the costs and things like that. So hopefully you had some of the same ideas. I think it's really valuable to work through scenarios like this and do some predictions. And I would suggest that you can write up something very similar to this and share it with a friend and do some of this work together and get insight from one another.